So since we are talking about strategy, one important thing is we need to define a clear purpose and the vision of the future. But more than ever, we need to make sure that we do the right thing aligned with values. Sometimes we use the values just as a piece of market on our strategy. But now with AI, we need really to make sure that we implement protocols, because to ensure that the generative AI that is orchestrating all the solution or all the architecture will be aligned with those values. So I think that is a point that we need to pay attention. And also, since we're talking about generative AI, we have all seen the AI hallucination, right, with the assistants. So we need to keep in mind that the generative AI was trained with the open internet. So it has the best and the worst of everything that we have in our society. So we really need to make sure that we have those protocols, that we have ways to have feedback, continuous feedback, and audit of, to oversee what the agents are doing. And also make sure that we understand that the generative AI will strive to give us one answer. So, and it was trained to not copy the training data and really understand the context and give us a original answer. So now with the agentic AI, we can really be specific, but sometimes we are trying to use the assistants while we would need to be using the agents, because the agents, we can really specify those protocols. So I think those points were important.
And thanks, Adriana. Yeah, Daljit, go ahead, please. Yeah.
So Rina touched on a few things. I tend to think about strategy, as Guilherme was talking about, as a moral compass, right? It tells you where you want to go. More and more as agentic AI becomes a reality in our daily life, it's turning into more into an autopilot, right? So, but you still need human beings in the loop. You need wherever it is modulating, so that way you don't introduce systemic bias into it, right? So the way I reframe the question is, right, what parts of our strategic process could be continuous, autonomous, versus which pieces need to be adaptive, so that way you have right governance structure in place, right overseeing in place, right? So the two places where I would be very cautious about it is, right, because if you are deploying large scale agents, either supervised or unsupervised, they tend to run on autopilot, which means their decision velocity is very high. As human beings, we cannot process all this information. And then if you are sending me all this information every 20 minutes new, I have not yet processed the last batch of information. How can I realize it? So that's one part of it, which is decision velocity, and how often, how much are you asking human beings to implement it? That's number one. The second part of it is essentially the core aspect of it, which is human oversight, both upstream and downstream decisions. So you want to have human beings in some form or shape involved to monitor the intent, ethics, and the narrative, because otherwise it's all mathematical models. It spits out answers, probabilistic or non-probabilistic, which doesn't take into account into emotions. And if human beings have to implement it, you want to be aware of it. So that's the second part of it. The third part, which is very important in all of this thing, is traceability, repeatability, versus a complete black box, right? You don't want to have systems that you can't replicate because it has learned and now it has predicted a different answer, and you can't replicate. Since you can't replicate, you can't fine tune where problem was or is, so that way you can coach, guide, upskill people. So those would be the three places I would think about, because at the end of the day, it's folks like you and I who have to implement it and live with the decisions. Agents are enablers, but not a replacement for us.